Good morning. It is 11:21 a.m. on Sunday, January 5th, 2020. I'm Christiana Ellis, and I've been up for a little while poking around. This is 5 more minutes. So, definitely need to, I've not managed to readjust my sleep schedule back to standard time. We'll need to work on that. But today is Sunday, which means I'm continuing my rewatch of Cowboy Bebop with Session 14, Bohemian Rhapsody. Technically, we're entering the second half of the show now. Not that we necessarily have just big backstory episodes to deal with. Like this one is pretty self-contained and doesn't really connect to any other specific backstory element for any of the characters, but is just lots of fun. This is, I think, one of my favorite little self-contained episodes, and it just has lots of great stuff. It's impeccably edited. It's kind of a classic noir style conspiracy going on. Lots of just silliness from various characters and cool set pieces. It's good stuff. So, let's talk about this episode. We begin with Spike, Faye, and Jet looking surprisingly competent. Or, I don't know, lucky perhaps. Because I don't think the question has ever been that they're good or not at their job, because they are good. It's just hard. And so they have their cursed luck usually and don't ever get to collect a bounty. But we see them capturing lots of people pretty confidently. Only to then discover, as we cut between Spike and Faye and Jet all doing a great job, and then Ed and Ein just sitting bored on the ship, and she asks how it went for everybody, and everybody is really frustrated. And the reason we learn is, of course, that they've caught all of the people on this list, but it turns out none of those people were the mastermind of this plan, and so the people who offered the bounty are basically saying, we don't have to pay you anything because we need the mastermind. And so they're all frustrated, but it's like, but don't you have any clues? And it turns out they do. They have all managed to obtain an identical chess piece, which is the white king piece. Turns out that this big, huge bounty for 12 million wulong is to find who is organizing this rash of hacking attacks on the astral gates. Turns out someone has set up essentially the equivalent of an ATM skimmer on a whole bunch of gates, so that when you pay your toll going through, it actually empties out your credit account and launders your funds through a bunch of different transactions to ultimately to a destination that no one knows where it ends up. So they want to know who's doing it, because they keep catching people. Everyone who actually tries to install one of these hacks gets caught, but none of them know what the organization was. None of them were capable of really crafting this whole plan. They're just following instructions. And so what's going on? Well, that's the mystery that we begin with. And I think it's an interesting one, right? Because it's a relatively, it's the sort of the equivalent of a low-level crime, except executed on a big sci-fi scale, right? And, it's a conspiracy. So we have Faye with Spike and Jet now saying, well, maybe we should compare notes. And they tease her because it was apparently her original suggestion that they use their friendly rival-like competition between comrades that can encourage deepening relationships and all that, when really she just wanted to keep the bounty for herself. That's a fun bit of character building to establish sort of the new normal with Faye and Spike and Jet on the ship, as they kind of get back to the routine after Jupiter Jazz. And it also sets up them each sharing what they know about the mystery. right? And that's just good storytelling, right? It's having every scene fulfill two functions. And so in this case, we learn that, some of what I said already. Jet describes essentially the basic scam of, you hook up a little device that steals the money for people passing through the toll. And the money gets laundered through a bank on Europa. And none of the people caught seem to have anything in common. And then Faye is the one that mentions that apparently at least some of the people involved got involved because they have just this manual downloaded from a website that's no longer on the internet that essentially explains everything, like here's how to do it. Use this software package and install it at this place on the gates, and that's how it'll work. And so that's basically like they're all just following instructions. So it's like, so whoever wrote this manual must be involved, right? But the website isn't even around anymore, and there's no real company. It was just a website. And so Spike points out that these, the hacks would have had to be done by someone who absolutely knew exactly how the gates worked, but for whatever reason has chosen to give it out to people who are just going to steal money with it, when theoretically someone with that kind of access could blow up the gates, could do all sorts of dangerous things, but instead is giving out manuals for just like, here's how small-time hoods can steal money with it, which is strange, right? And more to the point, the level of inside access that you would need to have all of that knowledge suggests that the gate company probably knows more than they've said about who this must be. So, in the meantime, Ed is, fussing around in the background while they have this conversation because of the chess pieces. And so we get one of the great bits of physical comedy from the whole series with Ed, where she's playing around with cables in one of the consoles and then shocks herself, and then it's just like, and she's just flopping around like a rag doll. And it just interrupts the whole conversation, and everyone just looks over horrified, like, is she okay? She's just lying there limp, and like Faye goes up and like pokes her in the cheek, and then all of a sudden she just sits right up, and she's apparently back to the cables. And it's just a classic Ed bit. It's delightful. But she is setting up an e-chessboard because she points out these chess pieces they found. All they do is let you play chess with someone over the internet. So there doesn't seem to be any obvious connection other than all of the people had them. So Jet encourages Ed to go ahead and play the game of chess. And of course, what we learn now eventually is that, the mastermind, so to speak, is of course the person on the other side of that chessboard. But here's where we start building out and showing the layers of this conspiracy web and all of the different moving pieces in this chess game of a mystery. It's some classic noir type stuff. We get to see the different parties being clever. So we have Jet, who decides to go and follow up with the Gate Corporation and does a classic hard-boiled detective bit where he goes in and he challenges the executives to their faces, just basically saying, I think you know more about what's going on. I think you're just using the bounty hunters as pawns, and I don't like it. I want you to tell me more about what's going on. And he starts smoking in their office and then just puts out the cigarette on their plant when they tell him to stop, and is challenging. And this is also where we set up that there's another one of his old bounty hunter colleagues there. And so, but then we reveal, oh, it was a setup because he's placed a bug in the cigarette butt. That's clever. And so as he's listening, we hear the executives talk about how they definitely know more about what's going on, and that they believe that the person who must be responsible for these hacks must be someone known as Chessmaster Hex. And but in the meantime, we also set up that Jet's old colleague Jonathan is also on the case. So when Jet comes back to share this information, everyone realizes, oh, that's who Ed is playing. So now they're going to try to follow the signal of this chess game to find Chessmaster Hex. But they're all suspicious because it's like, that seems really easy to find him. Why, that seems suspicious, right? Why would someone this ingenious make it so easy to find him? Doesn't seem likely. So they navigate to this old space junkyard where there's a bunch of derelict ships and gate parts floating around, and it's a whole, this is where we get the Bohemian element. It's a bunch of squatters have moved in and hide out from the authorities and live where there's out, lawless and just do whatever they want. And so they move in to try to track down Chessmaster Hex through the game signal. We have Spike and Faye in their spacesuits, navigating in through this place. I find it amusing that the wiki here for the game just describes the interior of this place as they find a surprising environment of cats, dogs, plants, and flowers, sleeping bums, a flock of birds, and a community of Bohemians living among the wreckage. And the thing that I find amusing there is just describing plants and flowers without the very obvious implied marijuana growth operation. And everyone smoking is clearly drugged out, not just smoking cigarettes. But I suppose they didn't want to make that explicit on a cartoon that theoretically could be watched by kids, right? But it's obvious. But in the meantime, what we also learn is that Jonathan has tracked the Bebop to this place, disables the Bebop so he can't come in to rescue them. He's following Spike and Faye in. Meanwhile, Ed is continuing to play the chess game, and the editing of this whole sequence is just amazing, with the music and keeping the tension up of cutting between, what Jet is doing, talking with Jonathan, Spike and Faye navigating the strange landscape of this in this ship interior, Jonathan in pursuit, and Ed playing the chess game. It's so good. It's so good. I was just had a big stupid grin on my face watching it. And then, of course, everyone, gathers when they find Hex himself. And he's just an old guy who likes chess now. He's old. And so Jonathan has shown up to challenge him, because we learn now that part of why it's personal for him is that he had his own money stolen and he wants it back. But as he is challenging Hex with Spike and Faye right there, he's like, you can't play senile with me, old man. But then the three old guys who we've seen show up from time to time, they all float in, they're hanging out, and then they're checking in with him, and it seems obvious he really is senile. Like, he asks about lunch, but you just had lunch. Is like, did I like it? And so it seems like he really is senile, except for playing chess. And so at this point, Jonathan kind of just has a psychotic break. He starts just firing his grenade launcher all over the place until Spike knocks him out. And it's all just crazy. But it's at this point they're like, well, now what? And so eventually Jet gives the benefit of explaining, the rest of the story to the audience as well as to the gate executives, which is to say, what we learned about Hex is he was one of the gate engineers, but knew that the gates were being made with defects that could have been fixed, but the gate companies decided not to fix them, and fired Hex as a revenge, or as like punishment, to shut him up. And so he set up this thing, this whole scheme, to not kick into play until 50 years later, which is, of course, exactly what happened. But in the meantime, he got old and senile, and he doesn't even remember. And so the only person who could shut the thing down, the only person who could have, returned any of the money, and the only person who could have, explained the whole thing, doesn't remember any of it. And of course, the gate companies, what they were really keeping secret, of course, was that they know exactly who did it, but their concern was, if we go after him, he'll expose that we built all of these defects in there. And so we have to, we hire the bounty hunters, but with a condition where we know they won't ever get paid, but we can look like we're doing something. And, Jet has the great hard-boiled Stan Spade type of turn where he's kind of just explaining how. And it turns out that despite the fact that you guys are a bunch of scumbags who did really unsafe things to save money, turns out that you don't have to worry anymore about this old guy. You just have to worry about us. But here's where we have a bit that I'm a little bit unsure about. I mean, it feels nice, but I'm a little bit skeptical that Jet insists the only thing that they're asking for in order to not share the story is just that they don't go after Hex. Now that he's been located, they say, don't go after him, call off the bounty hunters. After all, Ed would be unhappy if she lost her favorite chess partner. And it's like, I don't know, maybe Jet would agree to that. I don't know, maybe Spike. But would Faye agree to that? It wouldn't press for more than that? Would care about Hex? I don't know. I mean, it kind of wraps up the whole thing with a little button, but I don't know. It seems a little surprising to me that it isn't and 5,000, 5 million Woolongs or something. Like, I don't know why there is it. That seems like an inadequate compensation. However, it's also true that when you're dealing with an ultra powerful corporation like that, that if you make yourself too expensive to them, they might just find some other solution, like taking you out. So you don't want to push your luck too much in something like that, I suppose. But in the meantime, we sort of bookend the whole thing with the realization that in all of this time over the course of a week, Ed has been playing just the one game of chess with Hex, and he finally wins. She's like, oh no, you got me. And then there's sort of an implication that Jonathan has now found a home with all of these, pot-smoking bums, space bums, and there's a suggestion that maybe Hex has played his last game, but is satisfied having once again found a worthy opponent. And that's where we finish the episode. And it's just a lovely little bit. Like, I have that one quibble with the very ending, but so much of it is great, and I just love it. So that's where we're going to leave it this time. But next time, we're going to be exploring a little bit of Faye backstory with My Funny Valentine. So in the meantime, I'll talk to you tomorrow for 5 more minutes.